One of the most offensive things in a fallen world is a good conscience. One of the most offensive things in a fallen world is a good conscience. Right? Everybody wants you to constantly be saying, well, we're all sinners, we all make mistakes, we're all screw-ups, which is, of course, true. But they want it because they want to weaponize it. They want it because they want to steer you. They want you to keep talking that way so that you will not stand up for anything. Because you could be wrong. You're wrong a lot, aren't you? Sinner, right? Make a lot of mistakes. They don't want you to stand for anything because you might be wrong. But a good conscience cannot be manipulated. A good conscience cannot be manipulated. This is why whenever people are upset, they almost immediately begin demanding apologies. Just admit you were wrong. Nobody's perfect. You're not Jesus, man. Right? Those are the comebacks, right? You're not Jesus. Right? Nobody's perfect. Just admit you're wrong. Just throw them a bone. Even if you're not sure, just tell them you're wrong. Right? No. When people are offended, one of the most offensive things you can do is say, you have a clean conscience, which, Paul just walked right in there and did that. That's a typical Paul thing to do. Paul had just given his testimony, though, interestingly, which included the acknowledgement that he had persecuted Christians, including his consent to the blood of Stephen. Remember that back in 22? So he's just given his testimony in front of everybody and said, I was persecuting the way, I was persecuting Christians, it was awful. I stood by as Stephen was being stoned. I held the garments of those who were, and he just said that he was baptized for the remission of his sins. That's back in 22:16. So someone might reasonably ask, but Paul, how can you say you've served God with a clean conscience? You just told us you're a big fat sinner. Well, Paul's conversion and baptism are the very reason why he can begin his defense before the council with those words. His conversion and his baptism are the reason. I have lived in all good conscience before God. Peter makes a similar point in 1 Peter 3, referring to Noah's flood when he wrote, the like figure, referring to the flood, he says, the like figure whereunto even baptism doth also now save us. Not the putting of the filth off the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God. There's that language, good conscience. He says, when you got baptized, it's not, baptism isn't saving you like literally wash something off of you. But it is part of your good conscience before God by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's 1 Peter 3:21. Right? It is part of your good conscience toward God by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. All of Paul's sins have been washed away, especially his guilty conscience. That's why he stands before the Sanhedrin. That's why he stands before the council and says, I have a good conscience before God. I've been living as one who has a good conscience before God. Why? Because his sins have truly been taken away. They've been truly taken away. Baptism is a sign of that. It's a sign of the washing of the blood of Christ. And he says, I'm clean. I'm completely clean. Right? How many Christians sort of know technically they're forgiven, but keep carrying around the guilt? How many of you, I said, so do you believe you're forgiven? And you say, well, yeah, I am. Do you still feel bad? Yeah, I do. Do you still rummage around in your heart and pull up the old things and say, yeah, but it really was terrible. It really was awful. That's not a clean conscience. That's not a clean conscience. That's not the boldness that says, I am completely clean before God. I'm completely clean before God. You have nothing on me. You could hunt through everything. You could dig through everything. Bring up anything from my past. Go for it. Let's talk about it. Right? That's a clean conscience. That's a clean conscience. Do you have a good conscience before God? Jesus did not die. Jesus did not die and rise again so that you might have an okay conscience before God. So you might technically know that you're forgiven, but still feel really awful. Still feel really just yucky, disgusting. No, Jesus rose from the dead so that you would have a clean conscience, so that you have a good conscience, so you could say, listen, what do you want to talk about? Because what you have is in Christ, in the blood of Christ, you either have, it's just innocence, or wherever you sinned, it's a glorious testimony of the grace of God. Did you sin in that way? Oh yeah, I totally did. And Jesus died for it, and now I'm clean. Isn't that amazing? Right? It's either grace or grace. Right? But if it's just, you say, well, there's a Band-Aid on it. It says Jesus. It's a Jesus Band-Aid. But underneath it, it's still festering. You say, yeah, but don't touch that. It hurts. That's not a good conscience. That's not a good conscience. That's not a clean conscience. The clean conscience says, yeah, there was the grace of God went on it, the blood of Christ went on it, and healed it. There's maybe a scar, you remember, but scars don't still hurt, right? Unless you're Harry Potter. I don't know why I said that. Just making sure you're awake. But real scars don't keep hurting, right? I've got a scar here on my hand. It doesn't hurt. It hurt for a minute. It hurt for a time. It's gone. Is that your conscience? You say, yeah, I totally screwed up in this place. I'm so ashamed. But is it a trophy of the grace of God? It is a place where you say, yeah, I was in the muck, I was in the dark, I was in the black, I was sinning up a storm, and God came, and he got me, and he hauled me out. That's the glory. That's how Paul can give his testimony. I was persecuting Christians. And you're like, Paul, that's not probably good to say out loud. He says, no, I was chasing them, and I was throwing them in jail. Ask anybody. They all know. And I was standing by as they were stoning Stephen. They murdered the first Christian. I was standing there. Paul, it's kind of, there's still like people around that remember that. Paul says, I know. And Jesus came and he got me and he saved me and he washed me and I'm clean. That's a clean conscience. Do you have a good conscience? You cannot be courageous without a clean conscience. You will not stand up. You will not. You will not lead your family the way you need to lead your family. Because somewhere deep down inside you know, but I didn't really deal with that and I feel bad and I'm not sure about that. And so right at the point where you need to stand and lead, where you need to stand and take it, you won't do it. You'll back down. Oh, I know, I'm screwed up.